Okay, so thanks very much for inviting me. And I came. I got attracted by this idea of breaking the rules, which I don't know how seriously you're taking that, but I'm going to encourage you to take it really seriously and explain why. But I was invited to also talk about the demand centre. So I'm going to try and do both, talk about the demand centre and about breaking rules in the same time. That turns out not to be too difficult. So the demand centre is an interesting phenomena. It's sort of coming to an end, and looking back, I'm wondering whether it was a big accident or not. So the research councils in the UK do these kind of international reviews of their energy research, and quite some years ago they discovered that most of their work had focused on supply and generation, and they hadn't dealt with demand. So they, oh dear, what are we going to do? They've got a lot of money. Let's fund lots of centres all at once. 6 centres, £5 million each. That's a big investment. And because of the fashion for interdisciplinarity, they wanted some on social science. So that was demand, actually. And as I say, I think they got a bit more than they were bargaining for. From the Research Council call, the main questions relating to demand were about increasing energy efficiency. That's really how demand was understood, or promoting new technologies, electric vehicles, heat pumps, things like that, modelling future demand, taking account of the rebound effect, thinking about how to estimate future demand. A sort of on the edge, but it became more important over the 5 years, some interesting timing, partly because of renewable energy and smart metering. So when is energy being used? It's just crept a little bit onto the agenda. That was their agenda, and they have, as most kind of natural science and engineering funders do, a very clear idea about the function of social sciences, which is to help promote new technologies and to understand the social acceptance of heat pumps or electric vehicles or whatever it might be, and to overcome non-technical barriers and to involve communities in this, that and the other, and so on. So they were completely consistent with what I've written about before as the ABC. This is like learning to read. This is very, very, very simple kind of account. It's just that, attitude, behaviour, choice, that's as far as most engineers and policymakers get in terms of social science. So they don't read the rest of the learning to read book at all. There's no other letters enter the vocabulary, because the normal assumptions are so embedded, coming from economics and other kinds of disciplines. They're about people using energy. Okay, well, I'll agree with that. Energy consumption is therefore treated as an outcome of individual behaviour, and behaviours are chosen. Attitude, behaviour, choice. So if only we could persuade people to choose different behaviours, different patterns of energy demand would arise. And energy efficiency and consumption then depend on which technologies people are choosing. Is it this fridge or is it that fridge? So the challenge is clearly about ABC and beliefs and attitudes, and that's what social sciences do. So the first breaking the rules is that we did none of the above. So £5 million, 45 people, 11 universities don't care at all about attitudes, behaviours and choices, and we're all social scientists. So that's significantly breaking the conventions. So demand, I'm going to tell you the great benefits of not working with the ABC later, because I know some of you do. In fact, your whole conference appears to be somewhat influenced by it at the bottom. But demand is definitely, I've written some really kind of challenging stuff about the problems with efficiency. It's not about individual behaviour change, certainly not about the uptake of new technologies or what infrastructures. And so basically we got funded. This is what I mean about an accident, despite not doing all of the things that were set out in the call. But consequently, and this is where perhaps I should go now, and maybe we should stop the talk now, I'm therefore not also picking up many of the threads that are evident. So the bottom paragraph is taken from your call for papers here, and individual knowledge and attitudes and nudging and decision making, all these are topics that you're dealing with. So if you're stuck in that, I'm only on for 45 minutes, just like do something else or or pay attention if you like. But I'm setting out an agenda which is definitely not that. So take it as you will. I'm going to set out an agenda which works with very different starting assumptions. It starts with people not using energy. So we go back to a conversation about what is energy. People engage with the services that energy makes. I'm not using energy now. There's lighting, there's computing, there's all sound and all sorts of stuff, but I'm not using. Look at me, I'm not using energy. I'm not touching it, I'm not engaging with it. I'm not using it. Am I? So those are important kinds of questions. What we started with was energy consumption is an outcome of practices which are shared, not individual, dynamic, social, and that have histories. Economics and psychology never has history. We have history. Technologies, infrastructures, and institutions and policies aren't separate from what people do. They're part of it. It's not that you have a policy that affects behaviour. Policy is part of the social practices. That's part of the world. That's part of making needs and conventions. It's not outside of it. So reducing demand, if that's the challenge, and we go along with that, is about basically understanding the dynamics, how different kinds of energy-consuming practices are changing, perhaps kind of endogenously, not being deliberately pushed around, but understanding different processes of change. There may be scope to reconfigure social practices, academic life, international travel, these sorts of things, in ways that they become less resource-intensive. But that is not a matter of ABC or community involvement or anything like that. That's a matter of recognising how patterns of demand and consumption are embedded in technologies and institutions and infrastructures. So that's where all 45 people, and many more actually, because demand sort of had a rippling effect, began. So we are also breaking the rules quite significantly in being an end-use energy demand centre and really not caring about energy. Well, not in the way that energy is normally understood. So this is the trilemma. I don't know if the trilemma is important for you lot, but it's really, everybody just talks about the energy trilemma without thinking, normally. And the trilemma is about, policies that make a nice balance, whether that's a possibility or not, I don't know, between energy security, energy affordability, and low carbon supply. This dominates. But what's missing, always, is demand. How much energy is this triangle represent? Is this triangle this wide or is it that wide? And we've put demand at the top of the triangle, because if demand went down, a triangle would, what would happen to the shape of the triangle? Anyway, demand is systematically excluded from most policy by these kinds of things. And it's quite understandable, because demand actually is a political question, and so are some of these others, but in a different way. But the reason why I carried on being here and why you shouldn't get rid of me just now is that some of the conference call kind of picks up a little bit of that. And so I found this sentence, just one. So you obviously got a contradictory agenda, which is fine. But this sentence that says that energy transitions, which I've got a lot of suspicions about, but anyway, they challenge basic understanding about what energy means for our everyday lives. And that's important. Where does demand come from? What are the kind of coordinates of these trilemmas and other such problems? So we started in these contradictory places. We started by going beyond the ABC, by saying we're interested in systems and institutions of provision, long-term trends in comfort, what does it mean, these kinds of things. Social theories of practice, definitely not economics. We had some economists, but they were very, not normal economists. We didn't have any psychologists, and we had quasi-innovation studies people. But we were really interested in, yes, as I say, not energy, but in transitions, in the meanings of indoor climate or comfort or well-being and the future of office work and what is shop. These are the questions. Because our argument is that changes there draw energy demand through the social system. So you have to start in the right place. You have to start there. So those starting points affected what we asked and the work we did and the projects we undertook and what we found and the debates we've engaged with and who's interested and who's not interested and basically everything else. So I'm now going to give you a bit of a sense of some of the projects, not in any detail, but just to show you how starting in that different place generates different, distinctive, if not different, lines of inquiry. Some transport, some energy in buildings. So what have we learned about demand? Here's some examples. So demand includes a large section of the Institute for Transport Studies at Leeds, and people there, Giulio in particular, has been interested in the very idea of car dependence, which is quite common in transport studies. So people say Los Angeles is a car-dependent city because you know of its history, or some individuals depend on their car. But we're saying, hang on a minute, neither of those are really captured. Like, how does car dependence come to be? Car dependence is not just about Los Angeles, it's about where people are going as well in that city. So, what are the practices that come to depend on the car? Becomes our question. And that changes the way you think about driving, and in a way it changes the focus on transport, because you have to pay attention to where people live and work if you want to understand what is the significance of a car. So you're not only fretting about cars and bicycles, you're wondering about patterns of employment or patterns of housing, these other bigger questions. This is central London, this map, and it shows where the charging zone is, and it shows red is for where there's lots of traffic and blue is for where there's less. It's just an indication of that thing about car dependence is changing. It's not fixed, it's changing by the hour actually, and so the patterns of red and blue shift during the day, and they shift over the years. 10 years ago they're different to what they look like now, and in 10 years time they'll be different again. London is a living system. There is no one thing called car dependence, no reliance on the car in any fixed or meaningful way, because car is part of doing all the things that Londoners do, which have many different trajectories and dynamics, not captured normally by transport studies, but inseparable from transport studies as well. So we have to understand infrastructures not as fixed, but as dynamic parts of living systems. And when you do that, and this is changing scale methodologically. So this is an example of using time use data. So this funny little pinwheel thing is records of when people do different activities. And the one in the middle, the little link, is being in a car. So basically it shows you people were doing a certain kind of activity, then they got in the car, and then they went on and did something else. That's the sort of way that it works, and that tells you when. So it's a way of using time use data to say of which other practices is car a part. What were people doing before they jumped in the car, and what were they doing after it? And that might be part of understanding where car fits in social practices. So it's actually, the results are not rocket science or that surprising. It turns out that cars very commonly are used for carrying things, people or objects, really very commonly. Going shopping, fetching children back and forth to school. Taking the dog for a walk was surprisingly one of the highest car-dependent things. So you wouldn't get that from normal transport studies, but you get that from this. And that makes you think not only about dog ownership, which is perhaps significant, but also about what is it, when people promote like bicycle schemes, where are you supposed to put the dog? You know, so the car, if you're trying to use bicycle to capture some of car, you have to understand that car is about cargo, and therefore bicycle has to somehow become about cargo in some respects if it's to capture car share. So these lines of, I'm not telling you what the Department for Transport did with this, although I could. I'm giving you a sense of the kinds of lines of inquiry that follow from starting with what is that for. So another project was about the mobile elderly. Transport studies people know, and actually you can see it if you go to an airport, that the retired people are travelling more than they ever have done before and going further than they ever have done before. So rather than focus on mobility in general, here's a kind of cohort that something's going on, their practices are changing, so what's going on there? So it's complicated, as you might expect. A research project here looked at different cohorts of so-called elderly, people who've just retired, sort of 10 years later, and then people sort of over 80 and so on, to understand how transport and travel and cruise and tour and package holiday operating provision mapped onto them, were opportunities available to them at different points in, as it were, their ageing trajectory. Because what matters is the opportunities people encounter at a specific point in their life where they feel that they, where those opportunities in a way construct demand for them. So having lots of cruise operators was, for example, extending the travel lives of people who might otherwise have thought, this is too much hassle, I'm going to stay at home. So the systems of provision are affecting people in different ways, depending on their own physical condition and their own resources, financial and otherwise. So we can't just say there's more travel operators. Well, we can, but you have to understand how that plugs in to the potential to use that. Anyway, we know that those arrangements are on the move. They are moving differently for different cohorts of people. But the future is not fixed. Okay, travel is going up, but it's perfectly possible because in a way the idea of novelty and experience can be, which seems to be the core, can be delivered in various other ways. It's not inevitable that future generations of older people at different stages of age will go on long-distance cruises. I mean, that is such a recent phenomena. What holds it in place? And it's not yet. So nothing is inevitable or natural. And by looking at this mixture of provision and kind of cohort thing, we get a more subtle, a more differentiated sense of the construction of need. Offices, right. So there's lots of work on future comforts. I've done quite a lot, and other people have too. And air conditioning in Britain and Germany and wherever has really become essential for normal office buildings, especially in central London. And from a normal energy point of view, then you would study the energy efficiency of these systems. Which is the most efficient system? And how could those more efficient systems be taking the place of less efficient systems? We don't care about that. We're interested in actually why is air conditioning becoming embedded when it had no place at all in the office market not very long ago. And so we had a look at some office standards. The British Council for Offices has guidelines, and if you're investing money in property in central London, you're not going to ignore them because it affects your future rental income. So they're there, they're very, very influential. And grade A requires air conditioning. Nobody knows why, but it's just grade A, nothing more complicated than that. So that has a multiplier effect. So you're never going to try and build grade B. That's nuts. So everything is grade A. That is, everything is air conditioning. So a conversation with the British Council for Offices, interestingly, are very kind of eco-sensitive, and they introduced their guidelines to try and put a limit on over-specification. And in a way they are, because you don't know how much more air conditioning, I don't know. But there's some kind of really interesting thing about social scientists studying standards, which are at the intersection of engineering, investment, provision, consumption and demand in this case. Again, not a topic that figures in your normal ABC kind of language. Offices are also changing fast. Offices are changing, but not that fast. Office work is changing really very fast. The nature of office work involves digital technologies. You've probably spotted that. And it's not only office work, so where people shop, or online shopping, all forms of business travel, the Internet of Things, automatic updating of your phone. These all constitute, in different ways, like not just office, but they're very important are they important for energy demand? What kind of consequences do these sorts of transformations have? And if you talk to the more technical people, they say, well, actually, charging your phone is not such a big energy story. And then you talk to a few other people and they say, oh, but the data centres and the servers, and that's a big energy. That's where the energy is stored. And if you talk to us, we say, yeah, maybe of the first two, but actually isn't the transformation of location and distance and the meaning of office work, isn't this where the transformation lies? So at a minimum, we're provoking and trying to open up these kinds of discussions to break free of the energy narrowly defined and better understand actually what is going on. So it turns out, for example, if you ask those kinds of questions, that the pressure for high definition television, which is massively energy and data intensive further down the line, comes from just one type of television viewing. Have you any idea what it is? Just guess.
Sports.
Not sports. Animals. It's David Attenborough. It's Planet Earth. It's looking at the sweat on a frog, or whatever I don't know, that's wrong biologically, but you know what I mean. Some kind of tiny detail of animal. And then sport comes next. But for news, irrelevant. The challenge for news is to take mobile phone footage, which is quality below speaking about in television terms, and because it's current, it's, that's what news is. It doesn't matter the quality. So you have to somehow then get into the details and the history of broadcasting to begin to get the trajectory and the history of these kinds of trends, which are otherwise a bit mysterious. But all your technology is updating itself automatically to cope with some of these kinds of consequences. You're interested in transitions, and so will we up to a point. So another project dealt with the history of home heating, not now, but a good while ago. Well, not that long ago, really, a while ago, from coal fires to gas central heating. We were interested in this in ways of conceptualising and studying change, big change in forms of heating and comfort and cooling. And it's not very long ago, it's very well documented. So what kind of insights can you get from thinking about that transition for any other kinds of transitions? And people in government departments are very interested in shifts in home heating. It's one of their main priorities. But what we found, and I'm not going to tell you much about the technical design of the project, but it was incredibly complicated, a bit like with the cohorts of the elderly. We had to try and see the transitions in the technologies together with transitions in people's lives. So matching a sample of sensible people who it made sense to talk to. I'm not saying they were sensible people. Some of them were. But people, how are you to find out? Because you get a coal fire when you're 70. That's different to, you get gas central heating when you're 70. That's different to when you've got a young family. That use of the home is different. But in general, we found that the most significant things about central heating were not necessarily central heating. They were about the complete transformation of the house. And so prior to central heating, going upstairs to the bedroom was a punishment. It was really cold because actually that was a room for sleeping in and you would get under the bed covers. Now it's a room for watching television in, it's a room for doing all sorts, any kind of activity can go on in the bedroom. So the big transition in daily life, it's hard perhaps to separate them, but was what happens in the home. And we also discovered, linking to the television, there was some initially curious linkage. So in Britain, televisions kind of came in at scale at about the same time as gas central heating. And when we talked to people, they could hardly distinguish between the two. And you think, well, from an engineering point of view, it's quite obvious what the difference is, but not for them. Because watching television is quite a sedentary activity. Thus, having a heated room is a good idea. And the heat used to be more in the kitchen, where the fire was and the cooking was. And the television couldn't go in the kitchen, so it had to go in the living room. And that meant heating the living room. And you weren't going to light the fire, another fire, just to watch the television. So I'm not saying you needed central heating if you wanted television. That would be putting it too strongly. But if you had a television, you were perhaps more than averagely interested in central heating. And so we presented this to people in the, government departments, and they say, what were the economics of it? Because they're obsessed with economics. We said, what? I mean, that was simply not the issue. The issue was, have you got a television or have you not got a television? So we were trying to kind of use these historical examples to put a mirror up to them and shift the way they think about transitions. I have to say it didn't work, but we were trying. We're trying to say technologies make demand, they're not just meeting it. The UK funding is very, very, very parochial, so we had to work quite hard to escape the bounds of Britain, although we had people from all Europe. But we managed to do one project which was very influential in showing that this isn't just about sort of small-scale changes in living rooms and televisions and homes in Britain. So we looked at refrigerators. We are probably the single most important source of social science on home refrigerators. We looked at them in Hanoi and Bangkok. We were interested in fridges as they arrive at different points in national economic and food development and food chains because they enable people to partake of Western food and diet, and like dairy products and meat and lots of, they allow, if you have one, you've got access to kind of storing food in a different way. You then become, the fridges are the kind of sensitive fingertips of the global food industry, or freezers even more so. So again, this is not about efficiency. We care nothing about the efficiency of fridge freezers. What we care about is what they're doing to diet and how they're enabling systems of provision that didn't exist before, which are massively energy intensive, to find their way into different homes. And we did, but we also found some strong counter stories. People who especially in Hanoi, who were really worried about contamination and global food, were getting fridge freezers anyway, so that they could source food from their family and friends. So they were avoiding the Western and supermarket food system, but they still needed a fridge freezer. So in a way, they're part of different systems of provision. And a kind of long-term strategy is about understanding those different forms of dependence. It's not one form or another, but how they work together. Those kinds of interconnections between systems, not just fridges and food chains, but also offices and other kinds of connections. We didn't design this, I admit, but it was amazingly useful in a way. In Lancaster in 2015, there was a 3-day power cut. Demand centre was in full flow, and so it was a chance to understand forms of interconnection and dependence on electrical power in real time, right in front of us. And it took many people significantly by surprise. It was the biggest sort of peacetime power cut that Britain's had in terms of duration. The substation got flooded, so it was very difficult to fix it quickly as well. And so what did it reveal? It's great because it's all black, and it revealed more than anything could have done about the different forms of interconnection. So the mobile phone masts have a 3-hour battery backup, so they were out. That system had gone. The water pumping stations, some were okay, some were old, some were gravity fed. Can you imagine? No pump, and they worked. So we suddenly began to see old technologies coexisting alongside new ones. Phone boxes worked, but not everybody knew how to use them. Garage doors with a zapper didn't, and so the car became mini little power stations. If anybody had but you couldn't get the flipping thing out. The university had all sorts of troubles. It evacuated, actually, because you can't have that many students without any power. But all the doors were left open because they have electric and automatic locking, etc. So, of course, we were spectacularly interesting to government resilience committees, and we were visited by the Cabinet Office and so on. And what we revealed was how out of date both their thinking is and also most emergency plans are. The mobile phone thing was perhaps the most significant because it's not a critical infrastructure, because it's only just been invented, basically, and critical infrastructure plans were invented earlier. And the mobile phone companies have no intention of improving or extending the 3-hour battery backup because it's not their business. They just sell mobile phone services. So, look, lots of things like that. But I think in terms of social practice theory, then different forms of interdependence is the most significant thing there. Interdependence in time, I need to move on a bit, because when the power cut at night is much less significant than the power cut in the day time, because different things were anyway going to be happening. A lot of people are asleep at night, so the loss of power has got some other kind of social dynamics to it. Time, storage, flexibility, these, as I said, were coming topics. I think they're really going to be very important in the future. And that means not just understanding load profiles, but it means understanding what are the activities that make up those load profiles. So in the UK, if you talk about like off-peak or reducing peak demand, people say, well, why don't you do the washing at night or in off-peak hours? Okay, let's have a look at washing. Who is doing the washing and when are they doing it and how is that changing? Well, women are doing the washing still, but actually, more and more, they're doing it in off-peak hours, not because they've listened to energy injunctions, but because they're working full-time, and they do it at the weekend, off-peak. That's the shift from the 70s. So these kind of instructions and injunctions are usually just turn this switch or do that, without any understanding about who's doing it or what anyway are the trends in laundry. And of course machines are an important part of that. They change what it means to wash. Actually, I don't even know what washing is. Is it sorting? Is it hanging? Is it drying? So these things need sorting out. So all together, and we did a lot of work with time use studies. I like this picture because it's like a kind of living, it's like some lungs. It's like a living, breathing system. So these are the kind of electricity used by appliances on weekdays and weekends. And it squashes and grows, and the weekends are different from the week. Of course they are. People are doing different things. So this is kind of the most simple representation of temporality. To go further, you need to understand about frequency. How often does the washing machine run? Not just when, but how long does it take? Because if it takes a very long time, people aren't doing, they're doing other things or doing different things. So there's a zero-sum amount of time. So that's important. And what is social synchronization? What is it? What are the kinds of practices that everybody does at the same time together? Eating is one in France, but not in Finland. So there are different kinds of social temporal patterns that are absolutely vital for any discussion of renewable energy demand. And we also know from demand work that these are no accident, absolutely no accident. So this was a project on time in hospitals, looking at the kind of way in which the professional scheduling of activity, in that case in hospitals, but it could have been in other areas, generates a temporal rhythm. So it might not surprise you to learn that people go into hospital at all hours of the day and night. There's a bit, but yeah, it's not that strong. But they come out en masse between 3 and 5 p.m. So that funneling, that generating of peak load in terms of both energy and transport has happened because of the discharge procedure, because of the relation between the consultants' rounds and the pharmacy, and the way that's organised. Now, hospitals are not unusual in that respect. The way work is organised constitutes rhythms of energy demand. And realising that is quite significant if you're running a hospital and you want to reduce demand, because it's not only, or not efficiency, it's about the organisation of work. So following that, we've learned not surprisingly, that not all policy that matters for energy demand is energy policy. This is a really simple observation, but one which is usually forgotten. So health policy matters for energy demand, employment policy matters for laundry, lots of policies matter. Higher education policy in the UK matters for the use of energy, so we now take student surveys seriously, perhaps ridiculously seriously. And so if a university manager gets a kind of feedback that we would like university libraries to be open, students would like university libraries to be open 24 hours, they do it. So their carbon emissions plans, just like, forget that. But the student demand is what matters. So, yeah, how do non-energy policies shape energy activity? This is quite a big topic. Not least, we're calling this invisible energy policy. Because actually, if you looked at all those, forget energy, look at the non-energy policies, and then actually think about their consequences for demand, you'd get more opportunities for intervention, or you'd intervene in the way institutions work. Massive change, potentially. So, this is to finish. Some people think that reducing energy demand is about more efficient technologies, but we're saying actually more efficient, I haven't said this much, but a bit, can increase demand. I went too far. What we're interested in is the trajectory of energy services, not energy or energy efficiency. Because energy efficiency reproduces, it's about delivering the same service for less energy, so it doesn't question service. What we need is a change in service, not efficiency. Demand has been about how needs are made and how they change. The technologies are not separate from that. Air conditioning is part of making the need for cool buildings. Some people, I don't know that anybody really thinks it, that the future is going to be the same as the present, but they act as if it is. So most forecasts and government policies assume present standards of living for the next 200 or 300 years. It's never happened before. So why would it happen now? So strategies are part of the world that's on the move. And demand has been about understanding those movements across the board, not just in one area. So the need for energy is reflecting changes in social practice. And therefore it's about energy demand in the home, at work. You get these huge divides, like with the transport studies people. Something is trying to either shut me up. I think your system feedback is happening here in some way. I'm not shutting up. Working with home energy or offices or whatever, no, it connects across. So we're interested in, I have been busy with that. Yeah, demand side management, turn it up or down a bit, that's not how it works. All right. The only energy policy that matters for energy demand? No. Now I'm going to really... We've done a lot. These are our research insights. Have a look at our website. And then, so we did these kind of summaries of our findings along these lines. And then the pictures with the space hopper. We produced this dictionary. I've only got one copy of it. But we're trying to change the vocabulary. We're trying to change the meaning of energy, the meaning of efficiency, the meaning of demand. So you can look at it. You can't take it home. But if you read it, you'll find that some terms, like the rebound effect, have become obsolete. They no longer carry any meaning because we've redefined energy to talk about services in different kinds of ways. This, I think, is... Academics love it. Policymakers are just, what's this? They don't understand it at all. We've done a series of videos, which also we're telling a counter story. We have to be relevant. I told you we were something of an accident, but in a way our kind of challenge is to change the agenda, to shift the language, to introduce these topics into a field that doesn't have them. So we have to be a bit provocative, but not too provocative. And so our wiggly line videos are a kind of, well, you'll have to look at them to make your own minds up, but they're an attempt to present these ideas in a way that isn't too challenging, They're animated, they're 2 minutes each. There's a series of 5 of them, they're lovely. So we're trying different things, the videos, the annoying dictionary, and the kind of research findings-y kind of things. Yeah, these are the videos. I'm not going to show any of them. But I don't really know. We've got this like last year to kind of really promote demand, and if anybody's got any ideas to help me. You can see the pickle we're in. You know that we're against the dominant agenda. You know we want to shape it, and we've got tons of stuff, and we don't quite know what to do with it. So this is really to finish. What we want to do is make these points about understanding what energy is for, rub in again a different way of conceptualizing technology. Think about the timing and location of energy demand in ways that have not really been, but complete time is an established topic in social theory. Think about different kinds of policies, really shift agendas in research, and showing that intervening is, the present isn't going to last forever. So the last bit of breaking the rules is that I hope I've trashed most of your agenda. At least if you read the book, I hope I've suggested a different way from demand. I'll put the same paragraph that I put at the beginning of the talk from your agenda. And I'd be really happy to talk now about whether this is a different agenda or whether nudging is part of demand. No, I say, but I mean, we could discuss that at greater length. Or whether, if you've got any suggestions about demand, then what next would be good. I think we have a different agenda. I'll finish there.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I think you actually brought a very different perspective on energy into this conference. It's very different from anything I heard yesterday. So I am very happy about this inspiration and would like to, invite you to ask questions.
Yeah, Corinna Fischer from the Institute. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I always think your work is fascinating. It's very inspiring. But I'm always a little bit lost when I'm thinking about what this means. If you want to derive policies from it, just take the university example. It's probably not so easy to go there and say, look, it would be better if you wouldn't have this library open 24 hours a day because it consumes a lot of energy because this is not their agenda. And so how do you go ahead? Who do you address, and how do you do this? Argue with these? Actors?
No, I mean it's a perfectly reasonable question. And one thing is, of course, universities have people called energy managers. I mean, they have their job of managing energy, and you could say that's part of the problem because it keeps energy as a topic away from high-level discussions about future student income or policy. But then the question would be, well, all right, well, why don't we tell the people who are making policies about future student income that energy matters? And they might say, well, actually it doesn't because we're dealing with student income. There are some interesting parallels. So Jan Selby, who's a political scientist who's working on that project, is saying, well, how does this compare with, for example, gender or health and safety policy? So ideas about mainstreaming, could that apply? I mean, let's call it climate change policy, not just energy, to broaden it a bit, maybe. And already, you wouldn't say, well, actually, we don't really think that, why have we got all these women, gender policies that might be getting in the way a bit of different kinds. So somehow, looking back, health and safety would perhaps even be a better example. This is costing us a lot to put in all this extra, safety measures. Why are we bothering to do that? So there's something. So I'm not sure that I agree, but Jan's position is that there are possibilities to contemplate sort of mainstreaming in the same way. And And another way of thinking about it is it's already there, actually. So universities could be using a lot more energy than they currently are, but they're not. So we don't know where we are. There's a tendency to always think, okay, how do we get this level down? But there's never a question of why was this level here and not here? How is it already and in any case being kind of held, and by what other policies are affecting that? So I think there are some interesting questions. There's also some more sort of straightforward politics of liberalisation. Actually, why are you believing these little surveys? Why should an institution's entire policy be swung by the responses of 30 students? I mean, that's an exaggeration, but you know what I mean. So there's something about a broader politics of like institutional policy there. And if you have that discussion, I'm not saying you're necessarily going to get there, but at a minimum, you're going to redefine it. It's not going to be just a question of energy. And then we don't know what's going to happen, but we know what could happen is very much bigger, in effect, than if you stuck to the energy debate. Then it's light bulbs and boilers. And actually, then it's reproducing current standards, or even escalating them.
I think you had a question? And you answered? Okay. Then I saw you here.
Hi, I'm Dennis Ebersberg. I work at a research group in Jena called Post-Growth Societies. And thank you for the talk. It was great. I couldn't help constantly nodding. And I had the feeling that you touched on loads of issues that are very close to what we're doing in our research group. And so our basic idea is to focus on the problems of modern societies that arise from the built-in imperatives of dynamization. So modern societies need to constantly accelerate, they need to constantly activate human potentials, and they need to constantly colonize new territories that haven't been dynamized before. Mm-hmm. And this, of course, also closely relates to the problem of economic growth. And what you've been showing in very plastic ways is the ways in which time is constantly being colonized and being used more effective, and in which society is basically trying to force itself to constantly do more, not with less, but with more. And I've been wondering, or my question is, have you been discussing in your center? Have you been discussing all this in terms of basic dynamization
capitalism
forces,
for example?
Of course, that's one other way to frame it.
Yeah.
We have a lot of discussions about that, of course. But economic growth, dynamization imperatives. How have you been discussing that?
Yeah. In some ways, not head on, partly because there are 18 projects that are kind of spread across. Like, our strategy was, I don't know whether it's worked, to kind of infiltrate different areas like the health sector or, shopping and things like that, rather than establish this broader chain. But now we're kind of there. I think you're quite right. The broad argument is one about what is so we start with an analysis of social practices and how they change, and the economics is only part of that. So I'm not sure that we'd arrive at a growth kind of position, partly because stuff is actually pretty unpredictable. I mean, I know I'm not denying some of the trends that you describe, but for example, the whole IT story kind of, entered society in ways that it's taken shape and taken form. And the contingency of that remains quite impressive. And so we don't actually know which way it might go next. I mean, the David Attenborough and the frogs thing seems like most of these stories, when you kind of do a bit of a detailed history, it's slightly odd. I mean, 22 degrees C has a completely arcane, which is the normal indoor climate, a very, very weird kind of history with Danish guy and, stuff like that. And I think most of these sort of trends have those kinds of somewhat contingent histories. So it doesn't mean that there isn't some overlap. Obviously, there are, and there are kind of narratives of accumulation and perhaps speeding up. But I don't think, this is my optimism, I don't think that's an unavoidable set in stone kind of trend. I think basically longer term histories give you some prospect of weird diversity at a level.
May I ask you a question as well?
You may. You're standing very close.
No, because of the microphone. I understand your research like this. You're looking at what most people do, the practices that most people have in the UK. And I would like to know whether you have looked at sort of communities that understand themselves as alternative and maybe compared social practices. Is that part of your...
The most is interesting. I haven't really explained, I've given you little hints of research method here and there. I would probably resist the most because we don't know. We haven't set out to be representative. I mean, all the projects have had a different kind of logic of what their population is. So no, so we've used time use data, which is collected across the country, statistical stuff, not only in this country but in other countries. So you could say most for that. For the mobile elderly, definitely not. So there's different parts of it in different ways. Communities, no. And in that sense, we are not, I should underline again, ABC merchants. Thus, we're not actually caring what people think about the environment or energy at all. So kind of self-proclaimed committed communities would be not a meaningful way to go. They only are if you think that what people believe is, in terms of energy or environment, is a meaningful kind of concept. We're not doing that. So no, and nor do we probably have, there's a tendency to equate, people don't like, even people who really used to talking about behaviour feel a bit awkward about it now, which I think is good. And sometimes they say practices when they mean behaviour. And so they say communities have different practices, or something like that. Now, I mean, underneath it, we're much more hardcore social theorists. And so we take practices to be shared across space and time. We take practices to have a dynamic of their own. We're not really, we're interested in the dynamics of practice, but we're interested in how that's materialised. We're interested in the collective forms of knowledge in that sense. So the idea that a community can have a practice or be pioneers of new practices is quite challenging in terms of the kind of practice theory that the demand centre is working with. That might need a longer discussion, that might need more reading, that might need more going into, but basically there's a kind of fundamental epistemology and an ontology to social practice theory where the logic is to take the practices as the central topic of conceptualisation and inquiry and not the people who carry them. Hence, no communities. Sorry. Oh, well, not really.
Yeah, Tim Moss, Humboldt University. Thanks very much indeed, Elizabeth. I really enjoyed that, particularly the historical bits.
Yes, it was for you.
No, I have, I guess, a suggestion, but also a question. And the suggestion is kind of, you are appealing at the end, how can we get these messages across and something? And what you were emphasising very much, which was obviously very powerful, is how you were challenging, the ABC assumptions, and you're getting people to think in different ways. But what I thought in a sort of positive way is that it's, in many ways, you're showing ways of making their lives easier by showing that some of these kind of rigid assumptions or these problematic certainties are not as rigid, are not as obdurate, are not as unpackable as many people think. So, and you were talking about things like car dependency, you're revealing that it's not as much that, or, you know, lifestyles in terms of energy use. It's not, you know, people having modern lifestyles doesn't mean they're kind of locked into some kind of particular way of using it. By unpacking the sort of complexity, you're revealing all sorts of ways in and stuff. And I was just wondering if that was a way of, and perhaps you're doing this already anyway, but I mean, that's a way of trying to win over people and say, you know, these problems that you see as real, you know, glass ceilings you can't get through and you're running up against them all the time, we can take you by the hand, and it's a complex journey, but we're actually challenging some of these fundamental problems that you're always facing about car dependency. We can help you that way. And perhaps you're doing that anyway. But the question is kind of linked to that, which is, we're really interested in the responses you're getting to these kind of inputs. I mean, looking across those cases, are there particular kinds of cases where you're getting a rather more open, rather more a greater willingness to take these things on board? You're talking particularly about the house heating as being a no-go. You're running up into big problems there, but perhaps there are other ones are not so. And what can one learn from that? I mean, what kinds of actors are actually are saying, yes, there is a way here. There is some leverage for me to put, and what kinds of actors are just blocking entirely?
No, both very nice. Thank you. We talk to the Committee on Climate Change as much as we can, and they're setting the carbon budgets for the UK and for the future. And they know that they've never thought about demand. So they're a little bit uneasy about that. They take the figures, they take projections of future energy use directly from the government and work with them. And they're not, I mean, they're pretty clued up, so they know about some of the assumptions that those are carrying with them. So they're nervous, because obviously they should be. And they have come to demand and said, what can you tell us that can make our assessments better? And we, again, I say we're not the social scientists that can tell them about the uptake of future technology. But the thing is, they deal with models. I mean, all of these people deal with models. So I'm saying to them, come on, play. You've got these models. That means you can mess around with stuff. You can imagine that the future indoor climate is not fixed at 22 degrees C, because all their judgments are based on that. Why don't we play with a range? Just, you've got the modelling technology. And then you can start imagining, like, it's exactly your point. You can imagine future worlds rather than locking yourself into, in that case, 22 degrees C or passage of kilometres per whatever it is. Start messing with you've got the models, but the modelers don't see modelling as modelling. I mean, they don't see it as, it's very hard. They want, and it's not even about plausible ranges. They just have a different mentality. So although they have all the tools, they know there's a problem, and they're edging. I don't know, actually. It's perhaps still a bit of an open space. But my response in that is to play with the models, at least to break free of the straitjacket of mentality that is confining all future energy scenarios. Don't know, but I think, I mean, it'd be interesting to talk more about whether that's the way to go. On the areas open or not, I mean, demand has been, it's sort of technically finished in May, but it's got this other year, so we are finishing. But it means that we've had a fantastic experience of a range of different sites and sectors, many more so than any other, you know, like most university projects wouldn't do. Travel would be where I would say. The travel sector is also really boring, but has somehow got an idea of derived demand. I don't know quite where even the hardcore transport economists don't talk about travel. They talk about it as derived demand, derived from what people are doing. So the full implications of that haven't sort of backwashed over them. But that's to start. All energy demand is derived demand. So we're probably writing about derived demand is an interesting language that's already out there, and the dictionary has got some halfway houses, some words that we could just shift a little bit that are already out there. I mean, car dependence is an interesting one. That exists, but it's interpreted in, this is just another interpretation of it. So it's not completely what's wrong with energy efficiency or stop this and stop that. It's like we are, in the language and in various other ways, trying to find chinks. The institutional stuff is also really promising, actually. The hospital thing. Yeah. They know. They make their own rhythms.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this has been very inspiring, and I don't know, I think we are at about time to go on with the rest of the conference. I hope you take lots of what Elizabeth just gave us back into the sessions.
We'll see. Thank you.
Thank you.